company. We started here 2 years ago, almost exactly. 28th of May was my first time in Serbia 2 years ago. Just to look around to see if we can open an office here, and yes, we did. I think something like 3 weeks later. We're a digital agency from Germany. We were heavily in need of talented people to fill out our ranks, and we couldn't find them in Germany, so I looked around and quickly found a lot of talented people in Novi Sad, so we opened a second office here. The main office is in Heilbronn, Germany, and we're doing creative and emotional experiences, online, print, film, more or less all around. I'm Marcus. I was the lead developer and only developer for a time in the agency. We started really small a couple of years ago. 20 years ago, founded by a couple of friends, but just something like 6 years ago, they decided to go bigger and push the limits. And then we grew from 3 people to something like 20 right now. Yes, one of my favorite topics really is page speed optimization, so this is my favorite talk. If you don't like it, you're sorry really, but that's my favorite topic. And I want to know how many of you are actively doing or thinking about page speed optimization. In the back, someone is enthusiastically waving. So I need to convince you that it's necessary. It's perfect, because that's the lecture about. Also, if you want to talk with clients about it, or clients are coming to you and say, I need page speed optimization, I will give you a couple of good points, what to do, what not to do, and not to follow every screen you hear, because not everything is really makes sense. Neither in the short nor long run. There is always limits to everything you can do with almost everything you do. But in page speed, I will show you the limits. The lecture today is something special for multiple reasons. We have a theory part that's about 40-45 minutes. We have another part where I really show the practical application in one of our client projects. I broke it down to 0 optimization and then optimized it in 6 steps to the level that it has right now on a live stage. And I will show you with different tools how much that optimization really improved the page. You could also, I'm not inviting you to, but you could also leave after the theory part. That's why we split it up. If someone says, oh, I don't want to stay in a lecture that long, please don't. The other special thing is usually my lectures are pretty text heavy. Last time I involved something like 2 images, I was very proud of me. This lecture is only images, no text. That will be a first. So the thing we're talking about today is page speed. And to really talk about page speed, we need to talk about speed. Why is speed even important? What does slow mean and what is fast? And to illustrate that, I found slow and fast. And I'm really not shitting on the U-boat. It's a car, you know, it still gets you from point A to point B. And in many respects, it's a better car than a Formula 1 one. Because, I don't know, try to get 2 or more people into the Formula 1 car. It's not good for everything. It's just fast, but it does fast very well. So a fast website was defined by Google a couple of years ago, and they were very enthusiastic about that. They said when we reach the level of 200 milliseconds from you click the page to the page is fully loaded, then we're done. Then the web has reached the full potential, because that really means you don't have to wait for anything. You can click something and it's there before you can blink. 200 milliseconds is the very optimistic goal. A couple of research studies have found out that 2 seconds is the usual limit of when people start to get a little jiggly and start thinking about going somewhere else. And if you're constantly over 3 seconds with your page load time, over half the people will go somewhere else. So that's really interesting statistics, especially if you know that the average loading time on a website is 6.8 seconds. That really means there is a huge field of really nicely optimized websites, and there is a huge field of websites that really are bad. I cannot even say how bad. Really in the 2-digit seconds, 20, 25 seconds until they're loaded and usable. We will have some surveying examples later. I looked at them. But this is what being fast and slow means. So really it's the experience between then the page is there and you're getting anxious to wait for the result because you want to do something with the website or you wouldn't have called it. If you want to read something or shop something, really speed is important for you to reach your goal. And it should be easy. A website is not that complicated. A website is not rocket science. A website is just text and layout and a couple of images usually, maybe a video coming to you. why does it take that long? Websites have been around a lot of time now. It's over 25 years that we know how websites work. So why have they become slower even over time instead of faster? And why are we not there yet at the 200 millisecond goal? And to illustrate something completely different, I got an image from, this is all the satellites right now surrounding Earth. That's an illustration from NASA. They got all the publicly available satellites. And you wouldn't think it's that many that are necessary to do something. And that's really thousands upon thousands of satellites clogging up the space around Earth. That's also much more complicated than we thought it is. And sadly, the same thing is true for the web. Because this is what comes out of a usual website. That's from an interesting article from Jack Archibald. He's an, I think, British developer, I would say, with that name. And he wanted to see who becomes the Formula 1 champion this year. And then he looked at all the cars and the specifics, and he said, oh shit, I don't know anything about cars. But I can analyze their websites, and maybe I know then who wins the Formula 1. I think it's a flawed concept, but he tried anyway. And he measured a couple of websites, not with the fastest available computer, but he measured them on a phone with a 3G connection. Because a lot of people use the phone for visiting websites. Roughly 30 to 60% of websites are opened on a smartphone. So he used the 3G connection that you have mostly everywhere on a not that modern phone, and this is the loading times he came out of. The fastest one is the Haas team with 12.5 seconds. Remember, still the 3 seconds that people usually turn off. And the slowest one came out at 84 seconds. But even the middle area really is something like 20, 30 seconds to load a page, which is, of course, completely terrible. Even if you're a big fan of that team, after the third or fourth page, you would give up and say, maybe I try at home with faster internet, because it's really not usable. That's the level of not usable on the phone. And of course, there are faster connections, especially if you think about big cities. I also think Novi Sad has a really nice LTE network with its 4th generation. 5th generation is right now in the making. But a lot of people don't have that luxury. Not everyone lives in a city. Not everyone is near really fast internet all the time. Some people are on the train, in the car, on the go somewhere. So really making the website fast has a lot of benefits also for, you know, static people sitting in an office or at home. But a lot of people are using the internet from on the go. And many pages, like all of the Formula 1 pages, are unusable there. And that's why the average is about 7 seconds, because they're really, most people don't think that far. Or they stop too soon, because of course page speed optimization, like everything else you do in a website, costs money first. And it's really hard to see the benefits of that. But the problem is, of course, no one likes waiting. Isn't that nicely illustrated, waiting? There's only a very few scenarios where you would like to wait, and you only if you know it's worth it. For example, there's free beer at the end of that line. You would maybe wait. If you're waiting in that line to pay your monthly taxes, you're not willing to wait for that, because the process is infuriating and you have to wait for that. It's not a good combination. And most businesses are not in the I bring joy to people business. Most businesses have something to do which you have to do or you need to do, where waiting becomes even more painful. You shouldn't have to wait for something like, I don't know, shopping online. That should be fun, that should be quick, that should be easy. But in most cases it's not. And yeah, waiting is bad. And also bad, just side information, is Keynote, which I used for this presentation, but because it's not a Mac, I had to use the web version of Keynote, and the speaker's notes I have on paper. So, oh yes, there. Especially for online shops, speed is important. Another research study has seen that if your shop takes more than 2.5 seconds from page load to page load, 75% goes somewhere else to shop. Because there are faster shops, and even if they're maybe a little bit more expensive, or maybe it's not your first choice of shop because it's not the prettiest one, 2.5 seconds is, for 75% of all people, the breaking ground that I say, okay, I'd rather shop somewhere else. That is harsh, because 2.5 seconds is not easy to reach. This one I drew myself.
No way.
To illustrate how easy the web should work. You have a client requesting a website, you have a server answering and delivering the website, it's done. Very simple transaction. The problem is the transaction is not that simple. There is so many things that can go wrong. For example, I start on the server side. You have usually the web server, Apache, Nginx, whatever. You have a programming language working on the files, delivering whatever you need. You have a database behind that. You usually have a couple of different caches, opcode cache, file cache, and we're still on the web server. Then you have to send the data to somewhere, which means it has to traverse the internet. There is a lot of routing going on, there is a lot of trafficking going on, there is a lot of firewalls and load balancers that you can encounter. All of that can slow us down because every step along the technology stack that you have can either be a problem or a break in the process, which means every step could be optimized. I'm showing you the whole bunch because we're not optimizing all of them, and there is a good reason for that. For example, we don't have any influence over the network that SBB built. It's just their network. We're using it, but we cannot optimize that. It's one of the few things we just have to take it as they come. But even on the client, a couple of things can go wrong. You can have a local firewall that's blocking your request. Your browser might be slower or old. For example, if you're using Internet Explorer instead of a good browser. You can have an ad blocker that disturbs how the page is loaded. You could have another program stealing away all the computing power and your browser is blocked because of that. And the interesting thing about page speed is there is two things that really are important. One is how fast the page is really loaded, and one is how fast the page seems to you. So there is not only all the technology standing in our way, there is also the expectation and the, I would say, feeling and the human nature of the visitor also standing in the way because they expect speed and you have to fulfill that expectation even if you cannot fulfill the technical things. There is a lot that can go wrong with a picture that's that simple. Enjoy that for a moment. The thing you have to think about really is whenever we talk about numbers and speed, the interesting part is numbers cannot tell you everything. You can measure numbers, you can get a really nice result sheet for whatever tool you're using, but it will not be the truth because numbers are completely impartial. Numbers are just there. Making connection between the numbers you find, and especially thinking outside the numbers. Why are we even doing page speed? Some people forget that. Some people go for just speed, and it's really just a small part of the whole thing. Your website should still be nicely structured, have good text, have nice layout, but it also shouldn't load slowly. They're really not counterpoints. You have to fulfill all of that. A purely fast website that fulfills all the numbers and loads in 150 milliseconds would break any record right now, but has neither good content nor anything interesting happening is still not a good website. And some people forget that and only look at the numbers and put all their effort and time into that. Don't trust the numbers. You should get them, you should know what we're talking about, but you should also selectively ignore them. Even if the client says, that's an important number. You need to know the number and you need to be able to say, no, it's not, and have a good reason for that. Not just blindly following whatever a number tells you. Nicely executed. Yes, so we should be able to talk about those numbers. I on purpose didn't put the full names on there because it would have been way too long. I like shortcuts. How many of you know what this means? How many of you have seen those numbers or talked about them? I see 2 hands. 3, yay! Okay, the first number that's interesting whenever we talk about page speed is the time to first byte. That really means you requested the page, the server serves the page. When the first byte arrives at a website, at a browser, that's the time to first byte. Connecting the server, asking where the domain needs to go, all the routing and everything that happens in between is handled, you get your first byte back. That is really the only measurement where the backend and all the routing and everything comes into play. And that's why I said we shouldn't talk about all of that, because A, that's the thing we can optimize the least. We will talk about some things that can be optimized, but it's really we as developers have the least influence over that. And the interesting part starts behind that. Usually the time to first byte shouldn't be that slow, or you have different other problems. We will talk about them also. First paint is FP. And first paint really is just seeing the first element happen on the blank white page in your browser. That can be a background image, it can be just a background color, that can be the logo coming in. The first thing you see is the first paint. Then the user sees something is happening. That's important for the emotional value. You cannot do anything with that, but the user sees something is happening on the page. Then there was for a long time only one next step, but they included a new one. That's why I put it in brackets. The first contentful paint means there is content to be seen, but not content you can use. For example, if you open a page, the first thing you don't want to do is click the menu, because you opened a page. You don't want to click another page in the menu. But usually the menu is one of the elements that loads first. That means that's the first contentful paint. It's part of the content, but not something you want at that moment. You want the page to load. And that's why there is a second metric, that's the first meaningful paint. That's why you visited the page. So the text, the image, the video, whatever you wanted to see when you clicked on the link, that will come in with the first meaningful paint. The first interactive delay is the time it takes from the website being fit enough to react to whatever you're doing. For example, the website comes down, you see, oh, there is a search field. I would like to search for something. And you click in the search field, and the time it takes for the cursor really to take on whatever you clicked, to be ready to give your input, or if it's a dynamic search, and you type your input, the time it takes to show you auto-suggest, for example. That's the first interactive delay. The time to interactive is really, it means the page is loaded and ready to go. It can react instantly. If you click something, it happens. If you write something, whatever needs to happen, happens. That is usually the time that you think the website is done. And then there is the fully loaded time that really is everything that gets dynamically loaded, that was pushed back in the loading queue. If nothing is happening anymore for 2 seconds, then it's fully loaded time. Then your website is really completely done. And because there are so many metrics, and there are a lot of different tools to get them, and a lot of different ways that people think they are important, there is a lot of different numbers and times and values you will see in the different tools we're looking at. I stepped too soon. I have one example from Google, that's from the Google Help pages, to show you what those numbers mean. So this is really time to first byte, you get a white page. First paint is just a background image. The first contentful paint, search bar in the menu. Then nothing happens. The Google logo appears, but it's not really helping anyone. Then we have the first meaningful paint, you get a search result. That's what you would wait for when you open a search. And then the time to interactive, the images have been loaded and everything, whatever dynamic effect would happen, would be fully ready here. Now we step to finding out what the tools think about the numbers. I just picked a couple, there is hundreds, but I picked a couple of the most favorite ones. Chrome itself is a really, really nice tool to measure speed. It has 2 tabs in the developer toolbar that are really a wealth of information. And you can even call the network tab to be a wealth of information. We will look at that. Web page test is one of the oldest speed tests around that will give you a lot of information. I really like Cheeky Metrics, even if it's down in the corner there, because they combine 2 different tests and they have a different value system than the original tests. And they include as one test page speed insights from Google, which has become a lot harder a year ago. They acquired a company called Lighthouse and they included that in the page speed, which is now measuring a lot harder things to fulfill. For example, now the mobile score is the one they're showing first, because they say you should optimize for mobile, and it should be fast there, and it's always heavier and harder because mobile phones need smaller images. Almost few websites are really handling that nicely, and of course mobile phones have less computing power, have usually smaller bandwidth and all of that. So doing good in page speed has become really hard and nice. It's a nice fight. And Pingdom I just included because it's a big, well-known brand. I really hate them because they're pushing their products all the time. You cannot go and use the page, the free tools even, without them selling you something 10 times over all the time on the page. For me, they're too pushy, so I just included them for the name, and we will not use them. I will show you what those tools give back when we look at a famous survey website, Blitz. I was not picking on the worst website. It was the first result that came to mind where I said, oh, what website are a lot of Serbians using? And this is, I think, number 1 or 2 on the usage list. This is what GTmetrix looks like, and it's really nice because, of course, the page goes on and then goes on. But GTmetrix makes a really nice, compelling, short overview. So it gives the page based on page speed. They also include Y slow, that's from Yahoo. Sadly, no longer actively developed. It was the first page speed measurement tool. It's at the same time a wordplay on Yahoo slow and Y slow, so why is it slow? But it really doesn't matter which of the tools that they use, they come out at an F, really bad, at something like 40% of what they should achieve. And until the page is fully loaded, it took 29 seconds, had to download almost 5 megabytes and 460 elements. And you see with the small red arrow, that's worse than every other measurement that they can find. They always measure that and compare it to all the millions of pages they look at. So you know roughly where you stand. With those numbers, you don't need a comparison. It's really bad. What I like about all of the tools, they're not showing you a measurement unit and an explanation. They also give you tips what you can do to fix it. Almost all of them, and all of them sort them by where you should start and why you should do that. And that's one of the reasons I like GTmetrix the most. They have the nicest list. It's just really the most usable view. Everyone else is also trying, and the funny thing is GTmetrix has no special skills in page speed metering. All the other companies, for them it's the main purpose of their business, and GTmetrix is just a hosting company that said, we will combine the tools we have and make something better out of it, and for me it's still the nicest and usable tool set. Same website, tested with PageSpeed Insights. And as I told you, they say mobile is the most important one, so mobile is the first result we see. 23 of 100 points. Not that convincing. More of the interesting data I had to cut off, of course, because it's a really long page. But they show you, for example, the first meaningful pane, the first contentful pane. And they also show the first CPU idle. That means from that point on, the browser could take interactive input. That's the first time the browser wasn't really hard at work rendering the page. So they call that a little bit different, but everyone does. And you also see the difference in points. It's just 23, the other one was 40. So web page test is one of the oldest candidates, and you might be surprised the other two were really bad numbers. This has an A, B, and C. That really isn't too bad. If someone is a web developer from Blitz and looks at that, he's like, oh, I don't need to optimize, that looks nice. But they're looking at different numbers. And if you look a little bit more closely, the numbers are completely terrible, because the loading time was 8.5 seconds on the first page go, and 15.5 seconds when they reloaded the page. That should never happen. That's one of the real specialties of web page test. You can run multiple repeated views of the same page, and you can see the effect that a cache should have. A page should get faster and faster with every call, of course, that ends after the second or third call. But when all the elements are cached, it should be considerably faster. And you see here there was a couple 200 requests made for the first call, 52 requests made for the second. There is no good reason it took that much longer, but apparently there is an error on Blitz, and the second view is much slower than the first one. Shouldn't happen. So, Pingdom. You see the top half is advertising. And they're not even rating the page that bad. 62 from 100 points and a great deal. I will not use that again. This is the performance tab from Google Chrome. And they are showing you every single element on the page when it has been loaded, processed, and shown to the page. And they even show you a video version on top, what the page looks like. And here are the measurements we talked about. That's the first paint, first contentful paint, meaningful paint, download complete, and L is loading finished. Yeah, that's the last one I wanted to look at. And this is again just a list from GTmetrix and Rabbit. Because it's not that hard to do page speed optimization, and it's also not that hard to find the proper limit of how much you need to achieve or how much you should do. Because if you look at that list, we have 4 elements with a clear F, almost 0 points, with priority high. That's also why they start the list. If you have 0 points somewhere and priority is high, you should fix that. There is then one more with a couple of points priority high, you should also fix that. And then we're already in D territory with over 60 points. So the chances are high if you fix the first 5 elements. If you open the list in GTmetrix, if you look at that, if you fix those really important things, your overall grade will really go up. Because they're not doing everything wrong. You see there is even a couple of A styles in here. But if you get an A on a low priority item, it's just not rating that high. If you get 5 Fs on high priority items, that will tear down your score, as you saw, to 40 points. And it's really also usually stupid mistakes and ones that are easily fixable if you're putting in the effort and look at the mistakes, look at the errors, and make sure you're not overlooking them. And then you just follow the rabbit, and you're done. That's why the rabbit is there. You see where I am? Oh yeah, that's the biggest factor usually. We can look at that in the list before. Serve scale images. Blitz, for some reason, also has a lot of redirects happening when you call the page. That should never happen. Redirects are really just waiting times added to your page call. If you want to get a resource from there and the resource says, no, I'm not here anymore, I'm there now, you have to go to a second location. And all of that handling the redirect is really just time added to your page call. That's usually bad organization. But the second element, and on most pages it will be the first element, is really that people are not serving the images in the sizes they should be. And that's usually the biggest impact on the whole page speed optimization. So if we would only talk about image optimization today, we would already be 50–60% better on the page speed for the whole page. And to demonstrate that, I took an official portrait of Barack Obama. The image isn't that bad, that big, 800 to 1,000 pixels, it's 140 kilobytes, it's already a JPEG, already nicely saved down, not overly big. But if you're using that on a website, you're usually not using that in full size. You're usually using that to demonstrate something as a side note in an article. You're not using that with 800 to 1,000 pixels. I was looking at a layout that used it with 200 to 255 pixels. That's exactly a fourth of the size. But because the size squares, it's a 16th of the size of the area we need. Which means just by resizing the image to the size we actually need on the website, you're already reducing it to 10% of the original size. We already lost 130 kilobytes, 35, just by putting it into the right size. And then there is a lot of image optimization services, even plugins for Photoshop, plugins for automatically generating images on the server side. There is also tools like the TinyPNG. We've seen the panda in action. Yes, again, 5 hands roughly. And of course, there's a lot of different tools. So if you optimize that image on top of it, we gain another couple of kilobytes. Image optimization really depends on what you want to achieve with the image, because of course we still want to see what's in the image. The quality shouldn't be too bad. That's also something that gets forgotten way too often. Some people just optimize and only look at the size. But if you put an image of Barack Obama in there, it shouldn't only be that you can barely recognize him. It should also be, you know, aesthetically pleasing. He shouldn't be pixelated. You can do that, and the file will even be smaller. But that's not, you know, helping you a lot with all the other things like people enjoying looking at your website. This image is nice. I will explain to you why. There is a lot of other things other than images that have a huge impact. Some of them we can influence, some of them are just, you know, you usually buy a service or use a service that fixes that for you. And one of the things is geo-targeting. If a user from America is opening Blitz, for example, with the server somewhere in Belgrade, I guess, because it's a Serbian audience mostly, that will be slow just because it has to go back and forth over half the earth. It would be much better for Blitz to have a second server in America, and if they see the user is from America, they just say, no, wait, the Belgrade server is the wrong one for you, use the one in America. And you already cut the distance to so much quicker than that every roundabout, every file they send to you is half a second faster. And everything, of course, the whole interaction becomes a lot faster because of that. So geo-targeting is one thing that you can do. You can optimize something that Google is pushing a lot for. And there is a lot of tools that can help you there, that is optimizing your website to the point where only the visible part of the website, the part that when you open the page is really there and visible to you, only those elements should be loaded. It's called the above the fold optimization. So you really only load the elements that you need right now. And everything that comes later, you just load later. You can even do that, and there's tools for that also. You can remove all the CSS that is not needed for the top part. You can remove all the JavaScript that is not needed for that part, and really completely optimize the page for the first half, the visible part, to be loaded quickly. It's a buttload of work if you want to do that by hand. There is a couple of builder tools that help you with that. There is also a module from Google. It's called PageSpeed. Very, you know, it's almost as creative as my name giving. And you can install it in the web server, and they're just automatically doing that. They look at the page, render it internally, look at what elements you need, and serve them first. There is a big downside of that module, and that's something I'm not too big a fan of, that Google is always doing. They're over-optimizing, because they're only interested in the numbers. Think back to the number 5 that was threatened. They're only optimizing and giving you a good, quick result. If they're optimizing images for you, they're always a little bit blocky, a little bit not sharp enough, but really nice and small. And if they're optimizing for above the fold page scrolling, I made myself a hard job there. They usually leave out all the interactive elements, even if they're needed or necessary or really desirable. For example, if the first half of your page consists of a full page video background, and they think it's slowing down your page too much, they're not showing it to you. They're showing you a static representation of that image because it loads faster. So in some cases, they're over-optimizing. And one part, of course, then can be nicely combined with that one, let's say, further optimization, and that is lazy loading. Lazy loading is holding back all the elements you don't need from the part of the website you see until you need them. And the most typical example is a huge news page that only loads the images that you need right now, because images are the most cost-worthy, biggest part of the website. And as soon as you start scrolling, the server starts sending you, and the browser starts requesting the images it needs to show you the next step. And there is a lot of logic going in. You can, for example, say, always load the images you need right now, and for the next 400 or 500 pixels, for example. So when you scroll, you never see the image loading. But you can almost not scroll far enough to not see an image loading, because of course that's all dynamically happening. But it doesn't feel bad, because you see the page is already useful. You can already read the content, and you see there is something happening that never feels slow. That is a big difference from what technically happens and what the user is experiencing. And now it becomes interesting why we selected that photo. It was not easy. Thank you, Ivana, for finding that. Because this is geo-targeting. He shouldn't be on a beach. And he's reading a newspaper, first page, so above the fold. And he looks very lazy. Right? That's all three technologies in one image. I would expect applause, but okay. Not needed. Yeah, now it's too late. It's too late. So is this page 16 or 17? Because my notes say on page 16 I should read that. Ah, there it is. That's not all you can do, there is always more. And that's really the pitfall. You can never stop optimizing, especially if you use PageSpeed Insights. They're always upping the ante. There is always a new rule to fix. There is always something new they find. For example, the first contentful paint was included by Google in the naming and in the helping documents maybe a year ago. The term didn't exist before that, or not far before that, because they said they measured a couple of websites, looked at them closely, and they saw there is more and more measurement that we should include to talk about page speed. So it's really, they're very, very active in working on the topic and finding new terms and finding new tools to measure that and fit. There is also a buttload of dirty tricks, which I'm almost never a fan of, because most of the dirty tricks just really are using flaws in the technology, are using something that I call hyper-optimization or turbo-optimization, neither in PageSpeed nor in CEO, where it's also a really nicely used tool. It works well in the long run. There is always drawbacks, and most people just tend to ignore them because right now it works, that's good enough. Mostly because usually the agencies that do nothing else than dirty optimization, and there is a lot to be gained in that moment. My favorite story for that, sorry I have to leave the page speed optimization for 2 seconds, is from BMW. They hired a SEO optimization company and they promised them to be on page 1 on almost all the relevant search engines and words and keywords they want to be. And they made that happen because they used every single dirty trick in the book. And then Google saw what's happening and blocked all BMW pages for half a year to be found at all. BMW had to beg Google to be put back into the index because they were really misusing the system. They just found every single loophole and used it. For example, looking at the most searched keywords in the world and putting in hidden text on the page using that keyword a lot. It has been a couple of years ago, Google especially, because they promote good content to users and they want to show you a good search result. They very actively fight bad behavior like that, and it's usually really not worth the energy. There is usually a much, much better idea if you look at new technologies, because there is also a lot of approaches to figure out how to solve the problems of today with something new, with something better and shiny. For example, JPEG has been around, I don't even know how long. Thank you. Which is 20 years now, 21 years. Perfect. JPEG is still the most widely used image format because it is really well defined for optimizing natural colors, for optimizing gradients. All of that, JPEG was the best image format, especially because it worked everywhere. A couple of years ago, a consortium sat together and said, we need a new format for web-optimized images. JPEG cannot be the best thing we have, especially because it's really, really bad with hard lines, hard colors, font in text, and all of those. JPEG becomes terrible. That's why we have GIF and PNG for example. And the result of all that work was WebP as a new image format. WebP is consistently smaller than JPEG. It's really easy to produce. There is plugins for almost all image software. Almost all image optimizers can get you WebP. And right now, only the modern browsers can use it. So you always have to combine the JPEG and the WebP image, but that will go away. There will be a nice way to have even smaller image without sacrificing quality. It's already there. There is really no need to super optimize and find dirty tricks around that. I now told you why I don't like it. I will show you one example. Barack Obama again. Same original big image. We optimized that down to 13 kilobytes. There is one dirty trick that was famous something like a year ago, and that was the oversized 0% image. If you save the same image in double the size or even more, and save it with 0% quality, that works in Photoshop, it just looks really terrible. You go down to not quite half, but a little bit more than half the size. If you show that again at 200 kilobytes, the original size you were going for, modern browsers are good enough with image optimization that they will sharpen it for you and it will really look nice. Modern browsers do that. In Internet Explorer it will look terrible. But modern browsers have really nice image optimization routines. It's a dirty trick for a couple of reasons. A, Internet Explorer cannot do that. The browser has to fix your image. They really have to work on that, which means especially on mobile phones, you're using battery power for the user to fix your image that you broke to save a couple of kilobytes. If you're using WebP, that image becomes 6 kilobytes. So the turbo optimization is not just more work, it's really hard to figure out the right settings for that to work. It will not work on all the images, and instead you could have just spent the time on something more useful. That's really what I'm promoting. Make sure you're not fighting for the last point. If you're at 99 points in page speed insights, and the image sizes is sometimes a kilobyte too big, leave it be, in most cases. If you want to go to a full 100%, try a couple of dirty tricks, it's usually not worth it. Where's my dirty trick? Yeah, I already shit on the agencies that do that a lot, and there is a lot of them that promise either technical SEO or page speed optimization that is more or less the same thing. They promise you if they optimize the speed of your page, your ranking will go up. And technically speaking, that's completely true. Almost all search engines look at how fast your website loads, and because a fast loading website is also a nicer experience for the user, you go up in search ranking. What they don't tell you is that 90% of the work, they just go through the list that we saw with GT metrics, they just optimize the standard things you should optimize, they just sell it well, do a nice presentation of what they did, but it's really not rocket science what they're doing, they're just selling it well. And some of them have specialized in dirty tricks like that, which gives you momentary pleasure and usually doesn't work in the long run. You have to unfix that, I don't know, in a year or two. Maybe some browser developers get together and say, whenever we see that, we just show the original blurry image because they're misusing a technology we did. And stuff like that happens a lot, where I'd say over-optimizers have to take back their optimization again as soon as it doesn't work anymore. So please stick with everything that can be and should be optimized. It's already a long list. It's usually a longer list than you want to work on. So, hands up. 45 minutes, almost to the point. Other questions? Yeah, first part over. So, theory part over. In the second part we look at the practical things. We look at real test results, especially for Blitz, because I showed you just screenshots. That's not the same element of interesting as seeing a real result in a page speed analyzer. And I will show you the customer project that we did and destroy it for this purpose. Questions so far? Tiny questions, yes.
If you put it in the context of getting the measurement for Blitz, which is a newspaper, and getting the first results from mobile, isn't like opposite to where it's usually used in apps which are native and which is a different thing. So you actually get the data which you probably don't need as much.
Oh, you would be right if I had used the Blitz data from mobile. But this is the desktop measurement for a high quality desktop connection. I think they're testing with 10 megabits or something like that, which is not, lightning fast. but it's even slow on desktop. Yes, Bits has an app, so testing it for mobile really doesn't completely fit the bill, but this is the desktop measurement, it's also really, really bad.
But I would disagree. If somebody shares a link and you don't have the app, you're going to open it from a mobile device, and I'm guessing they have a lot of users that get shared the links and like get your stories right away without using the app. So
yeah,
that's
probably.
why they should optimize the browser.
It's easy to answer at least part of that. You should never be that little optimized. Not even for desktop, not even if you know your users are all sitting in the really nice fiber optics network in just one university, for example. This is still a bad experience, because if you have to download 5 megabytes for just opening the page, that will never be fast. It will especially never feel fast. It always feels like you click something and you could go for coffee until the page loads. It feels like that. Of course, it's not quite that long, but it's already frustratingly slow. So from the point of someone having a website and showing the website to a viewership, this is bad in any case. And if you nicely optimize that for desktop, of course mobile is also improved. Partly answer the question. Another one. Usually I make a limit of 3 questions. I'm not stopping before 3 questions are answered. But because we have a second part, we can maybe, second question.
I'm interested to know, how do you handle like WebP usage? What do you use to utilize the browser does not support it format? Do you use some server-side technique, or you just replace the image with JPEG with JavaScript, or how do you handle it?
Okay, there is a couple of nice technologies that can be used for optimized images. I'm showing one in the practical application, and it's really, how many of you have heard about a picture element? I want to see some hands. Okay. The picture element is the new generation image, and you can give multiple sources of image to a picture element, and the browser is selecting the one that it likes the most. So you can, for example, use a WebP image and a JPEG image, and if the browser is supporting WebP, it just uses that. If it doesn't support it, there's usually a fallback solution to just use the first URL it finds, or you have a fallback image, real classic HTML image. The technology is also used for giving the browser multiple responsive versions of an image, multiple sizes for the image, and then it depends on the viewport, and the browser is automatically selecting that. That is the nicest fallback version, because you don't need JavaScript for that to work. You don't need any external services or anything like that. You just generate all the images, give the browser a stack of picture elements, one picture element with multiple sources, and the browser takes what it needs.
Okay, but the next question then, let's say you have like hundreds or thousands of images. Yeah. How do you generate data HTML? Like doing that manually, it will take much time.
Yes, but I'm not sure how many people are just writing their HTML manually. Most websites are done with some kind of CMS. It's something like, I don't know, 80% of all websites in the world are done with WordPress. By far the most used CMS. And there is just a plugin for WordPress that gives you that. Okay. Where you put an image into the page, the plugin optimizes that for you and manipulates the output to have optimized images. We're using the Contao CMS most. I'm still promoting that, and we're still planning to do lectures about that. And Contao has a built-in plugin. It was a plugin, now it's built-in technology that lets you even do responsive styles, multiple viewports, and multiple resolutions, just as a setting in the CMS.
Yeah, I have a question about picture element. What's the support from that?
Very, very nice. Most of you hopefully know Can I Use, the website. It's a really nice overview website. You can search for any technology in the world. And instead of talking about it, I could show it to you. That's not what I wanted. Yes. Oops. Almost. Can I use picture element? Where's my mouse? There.
So Internet Explorer is not supporting it?
Yeah, but you know, who wants to support Internet Explorer anymore? Yeah, but for Internet Explorer there is a polyfill. You can also have a classic image element on top of everything. And if you look at usage statistics, it's still 92% of all users.
Right.
that have the nice technology, and with the fallback of an image, you really have nicely and easily 100% of all people that can see your image.
I have a great example of Google penalizing one of my client websites who has Internet Explorer users mostly desktop users. So we have to support mobile, even though it's like 0.5% of their users.
Yeah, and that it comes back to trusting the numbers. You shouldn't.
Well, no, Google penalizes them because.
Oh yeah, Google penalizes them in SEO ranking.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sadly their good right.
Yeah.
That's more or less house right of the search engine that is doing its own valuation of the page. Yeah, for that reason and that reason alone, you might have to page speed optimize for mobiles, because Google is really putting the mobile score as the most important score in their ranking system now. They announced it for a couple of years. It's not surprising, but now they're doing it. So in that case, yeah, you have to optimize or live with the consequences. Okay, one more question? Yes.
Just a small comment about that. Blitz website is actually using plenty of JavaScript from all kind of external elements which are not from the Google from the Blitz RS domain.
Yes.
So that page is actually calling all kind of junk, and in a end user experience, web browser needs to process and to call all those elements and put them together. How is there a way to in the terms of JavaScript to use any some smaller and better optimized JavaScript which will run in terms of doing analytics? For should we use only Google Analytics or some other analytics, for example, to speed up the end user experience? And
most JavaScript is not critical for the page to be displayed. Most JavaScript is enhancing the page, especially if you did it, you know,
okay,
by
those
the
animations and
principles.
I agree with that.
And analytics is part of that. You're counting the website view is not critical for the users. It might be critical for you, but it shouldn't block the user experience. And then there is two technologies in JavaScript that can help you there. That's async or defer. They're doing more or less the same thing. There's been large articles about the difference, but mostly they're waiting with the JavaScript loading until the browser is not busy anymore, or all the other elements that are really strictly needed for the page are already loaded. And that's why there is a difference between time to interactive and fully loaded. Because time to interactive, all the critical components are there. The browser can render the page can be viewed and used, but it might not be fully loaded yet. If you're enhancing with some animation, if you're adding, for example, the auto-suggest logic for the search field, you don't need that in the first 2 seconds of the website, because almost no one is opening the website and automatically go into the auto-suggest, so we can defer that for later. And all of that can be used to just not block the users for on viewing the page.
Well, from my experience, on a desktop, I blocked more than 7 of external JavaScript related, which the Blitz RS is calling. And the page is actually loading much faster.
Yeah, of course. Oh, that's a really nice benefit. How many of you are using an ad blocker? I would expect 100% of hands to go up. And that's really almost all the ad blocker plugin providers do that in their advertising. They say use an ad blocker, not because you hate ads, but because it fastens up your website experience by usually half the time. Because most big websites, and Blitz of course is one of the nice examples, if you get rid of all the advertisement, the page is really something like half the time loading time, even a little less than half the time. Of course they don't like that, but then they shouldn't put that much junk on their page that is barely usable anymore. So there is always the fight, you know, what you want to get out of the website and what they want with their website, because they want to earn money. So that's a very careful balance they need to find, and right now they're pushing it to 100% earning money. That might be not the right level of the scale.
And also I noticed that they are using some weird and very old JavaScript Flash kind of video players.
Yes.
So why they don't use some other which are more optimized?
Oh, because that's just, you know, work to change it. No, a lot of times it comes down to, if you want to make it better, you have to make it better, which is work, which, you know, needs time and energy, and of course every time you change something.
But there are plenty of market on the market.
Yeah, of course, but it's still,
Yeah,
you cannot underestimate.
Their users care about speed, no, because their grandma's reading the article. So why would they spend money on something like that if they're not care about the speed?
The big problem really is that sometimes you lose focus on that, or you lose that from the just talking about how easy it would be to fix that. A website like Blitz is ginormous. There is probably a very untidy, really big code base behind that, and making a tiny change like replacing the video player. Maybe then your logic doesn't work anymore for making sure the video works on all the browsers, on old Safaris or Internet Explorers or something like that. There might be really unforeseen consequences. So it is really a lot more work than you would expect, because the page is so big and old and is fighting with a lot of legacy code. And then just replacing the video player might not be as easy as it sounds. But it would be something that's probably worth it. In general, looking at the page, you could optimize a little bit. And for example, a good thing that really doesn't hurt anyone would be optimizing the images. Really, the website doesn't care if the image is now the right size and doesn't have to be scaled down on the browser. That is pure laziness not to do that in the back end. Probably cost-benefit analysis, they say it's not worth putting in the effort because there is still enough users on the page. Usually, websites like Blitz that are in the top 1 or 2 or 3 used websites in the country, they only start looking at things they can do better when they're going measurably down in viewership and the people are complaining or something like that. If people are not complaining and people are still coming to the website, it will not get optimized. There is proof.
I have a question. So some of the metrics give bad scores on external scripts that are tracted scripts like Hotjar or HubSpot, etc. That don't have an effective caching policy.
Yes.
So how would we battle that?
Oh, there is a couple of things you're really not well equipped to fight. You can still optimize that. For example, you could just download the current static version from them, serve them from your server with all your nice optimization. And the downside, of course, would be on a regular basis you have to go back to them and see if there is a new version of that script. You can still battle that, but that really is very, very detailed optimization. I will come to that at the end of the demonstration, that there really is a lot of small things you can do, but the biggest effect, you know, Pareto principle with 80% of the result can really be done with 20% of the work. We will talk about that 80% first, and then go into small details like that. Okay. If there's no more questions, I will say we do something like a 5-minute cookie break, because we promised cookies, so there are cookies. And then come back for the practical part. Thanks everyone.
Ти знаєш, чого ти се радила? Ти страшно да кажеш.
Hi. Hi.
And I have a question because I think there are times so I didn't hear the introduction and so I'm sorry it's because of my job and really these 2 weeks it's really chaos in my life.
I get it, I wrote a presentation yesterday.
So usually I do the lecture and everything, and I didn't have time for that, and then because I didn't hear your introduction and everything, but I think because of your company, is this your company?
Yes, on my company, I'm just the CEO here.
You're the CEO.
In Serbia.
In Serbia.
Yes.
Okay.
And in German office, I'm the CTO, Chief Technical
Oh,
Officer.
from Germany. You can speak in Deutsch?
Yes.
That's why I asked, because it's very interesting am Anfang. Also ich wollte nur fragen, weil ich habe, glaube ich, Ihnen mein CV geschickt, wenn Sie eine Anzeige haben. Ich kann mich jetzt nicht erinnern, wie viele Monate, oder vielleicht ein Jahr auch. Weil ich war, also ich wollte irgendeine Arbeit machen, wo ich meine deutsche Sprache, ich bin in Wien und deswegen kann ich Deutsch sprechen und so. Ich habe keine Universität oder so, also ich spreche Deutsch nicht native, aber ich kann alles sagen, ich verstehe alles, ich lerne alles sehr schnell. Und ich wollte... Everybody alles hören jetzt?
Meine Antwort hat jeder gehört, ja.
Ich wollte nur fragen, weil ich habe jetzt eine Arbeit und auch andere Pläne auch. Nur wollte ich fragen, jetzt war es interessant, Ihre Company, und ich habe mir gedacht, also ich bin kein so, aber also die Anzeige war so, dass ich gedacht habe, vielleicht kann ich das auch machen. Und wie es sehr interessant war, also habe ich dann mein CV geschickt und deswegen bin ich gekommen, um zu sehen, was in ihrer Company gemacht was sie machen, was die Arbeit da ist. Und deswegen, und ich wollte nur fragen, also wenn jemand bei Ihnen arbeitet, also muss er also in diesem Sektor das alles können. Und,
ja, wobei das ist, wir haben tatsächlich zwei.
Damit ich weiß, dass ich da
wir haben tatsächlich zwei komplett getrennte Aufgabenbereiche in Norissa hier im Büro. Und das ist einmal die Webentwicklung, das waren die Leute, die wir nicht gefunden haben in Deutschland. Was auch ein Großteil des Büros ist, also die meisten sind Webentwickler, die müssen das können. Und was wir damals gesucht haben, war eine Supportstelle, also wirklich für Telefon, für Mail-Support. Wissen dazu nicht schadet. Schön wäre natürlich, aber nicht auf dem Niveau nötig ist.
Mich interessiert das, nur nicht.
Ja.
Aber es ist sehr interessant und ich kann das lernen und so, aber das wusste ich damals nicht, was eigentlich da erwartet ist. Deswegen bin ich gekommen, um zu sehen, um was es geht.
Unsere Supporter machen tatsächlich auch, die rufen regelmäßig die Tools auf, also Chief Metrics zum Beispiel, und machen dann Screenshots, vergleichen die Ergebnisse von vor 3 Monaten mit jetzt und machen dann aber nicht weiter. Wenn dann ein deutlich schlechteres Ergebnis dabei rauskommt, dann machen sie zum Beispiel ein Ticket auf und ein Entwickler kümmert sich drum. Weil einfach die Tools, es wird nicht wirklich die Geschwindigkeit schlechter, die Werkzeuge werden immer anspruchsvoller und deswegen über Zeit geht einfach die Wertung runter, man muss regelmäßig dagegen ankämpfen.
Und das machen wir in deutscher Sprache?
Deutsch, Englisch und Serbisch. weil ich kein Serbisch kann immer noch. Die Kunden natürlich am liebsten Deutsch wollen. Und im Team, aber wenn ich nicht beteiligt bin, auch ganz oft auf Serbisch.
Und gibt es da ein Training?
Ja. Aber ich kann ganz offen, ehrlich gar nicht sagen, wie der aktuelle Stand ist. Weil wir haben eine Personalerin, HR-Managerin, die alles macht, was Recruiting angeht und auch die CVs alle hat. Ich habe keine Ahnung, wie der Prozess da steht. Ich sehe sie nur einmal die Woche.
Aber es ist immer anders, wenn man so kennenlernt und sagt und so. Also ich bin nicht jemand, der so keine Arbeit hat und jetzt irgendwo arbeiten will. Es ist nur so, dass ich alle diese Anzeigen, wo ich meine CVs geschickt habe, ihre Firma, waren ja sehr interessant. Und alles da, was das ausgeschrieben ist und die Weise jetzt ausgeschrieben. Und da habe ich mir gedacht, es würde interessant sein, auch in diesem Bereich und so, auch wenn ich nicht so jung bin, aber ich bin schon jung. Ich meine Knie und nur nicht so. Also ich bin echt nachgebaut. So, dann freut mich sehr, dass wir uns kennengelernt haben und dann werde ich vielleicht mal an Sie schicken.
Wir sind noch ein Weilchen in uns.
Noch ein Weilchen?
Ja, nee, ich meine. keine Ahnung, 10 oder 20 Jahren.
Okay. Das freut mich auch. Also, Wiedersehen, danke schön.
Marcus,
Yes.
did you analyze incubators that page?
No. Should we?
Yes. I want to know what it is.
We can do that now.
Ja, komm, erst. Ja, ich könnte von Kadenzi kogoś znaleźć.
Z tego razlica.
Ima smeća, je spostao sadržaj smeća. Ja sam nepotrebni stvari
Surprise, negative, positive.
što sad ne radi, kad vidiš neki video ne radi.
I don't think it's that bad.
What?
I don't think it's that bad.
Well, I was directly working on it, it can't be bad.
Prvo koriste flash.
Yeah, but the Blizzard side is really outlier, so I was really happy that one of
Yes. I didn't make the way, all the content sucks.
And I looked at it, oh, that's an
I onda povuče i
What's the name? That's
sa tog domena. To kada uključiš onda pokrene. Sad će povuče nešto što
They are very effective.
But they're probably more back-end flash cards than yeah.
No, I mean, the guys from, that are making different companies, they have a problem. I'm eager to see what
PC. Yes. No, it means most websites load it as 1,000 pictures because and most people are really completely not, but I think they have something like also 90 for that. Okay, we can do
Ne tu, brate, ne tu, nemoj na to.
I need to change the settings in mirror or I'm getting a broken neck. The second part.
Only thing you can
I'm mirroring now my screen. Much better. Then I can work here and you see the same thing. That's so. It's always better.
No, with K.
It's just
No, you left an eye.
Did that happen? That would be nice.
Ja nisam notistirao, ne mogu ovako.
We do that next, but we open it in the background, because we don't need to actually looking at that.
Uopšte nije loše.
And also try following
Ček, šta kaže za inkubator? Follow. There it is.
So the cookies are almost over. Oh wait, I don't have to scream that much. Yes, the cookies are almost out, which means we can continue. It's nice. During the break, we talked about a couple of websites and people were interested how they fare. Of course, you can also test that yourself at home. Just GTmetrix is a free tool. Even creating an account is free. And if you're using it a little while, I would recommend doing an account, because you can see that here I'm logged in right now, and it's always showing you the last 100 results of pages you looked at, and you can always look at them again. And you see on a quick view how they rated, and you can even click that again for checking it again. That is very, very convenient if you look at a couple of pages, just to figure out something. So we tested the incubator website because we're here right now, just as an introduction to what we're doing. It's not that nice, but it's also not bad. And you see that with the page speed score, it has a green arrow up, which means the average score is 72. You're even better here with 77. It's still not great. Of course, you can see that it's a C.
It's yellow, yeah, not green.
No, but the caching.
No, it's gold.
Yeah, it's gold. And you can also see that the list of F entries is much shorter. And I promised you that always optimized images is one of the first elements.
Satireka.
But the biggest point here is you're not caching your pages properly.
We're not caching them at all.
Yes.
Something like that, yes. So for the second practical part, I wanted to look at a couple of things live, and then we're digging deeper into the page I brought with me, our customer project that we deconstructed. I just wanted to show you a couple of real results. For example, incubator. And before that, I just showed you screenshots. Of course, it's not that interesting anymore. I told you that GTmetrix is, I like it especially because with every element in that list, you can open it up and see the explanation. Why did it get such a bad grade? They rate it as coming from the server with high priority and done badly. Here at the end is the question we got earlier. It's Google Analytics that came from external. Oh, you can barely see that. Let me help. Now you can. So Google Analytics is delivering their files with almost no caching. There is of course a good reason. If you're caching analytics too much, it might hinder with the counting, all the changes they want to do with analytics and live updates on the code will be hindered. So they give you very few cache, a very little cache that can almost not be fought. You have to live with that. If you're using analytics, those 2 points will be here forever, but that's not the reason you get an F grade. With analytics as the only problem in that block, you get maybe a B- or something like that, but not an F. But the static elements coming from the website itself have no cache setting at all. That is bad. And that's why there is F with 16 points. You should always have cache settings. How many people of you know where caching sets in and what's happening coming out of that? Okay, one. I hope it's more than one. Okay, very, very quick introduction. A cache is generally just in-between storage for everything. That started with grain in a barn, so cache is really an old term. There is usually at least one cache on the server side that looks if really that the thing you're asking of it needs to be generated fresh, or if it can be just delivered from a generated version a couple of minutes or hours ago. You might have some caching happening along the way during the internet, and they're called proxy caches. That happens, for example, if 1,000 people in the same city are calling the Blitz website at the same moment, and they're all using SBB. Then SBB might include a proxy cache along the way, and every item that is not unique, all the images that are the same, might be delivered directly from SBB and not from the Blitz web server. Because that's a better experience for the SBB customers, but it's also reducing the net load on SBB, so they're doing it for you and for themselves. Nice for both. The biggest caching thing that you can have is the cache in your browser. Because your browser is storing everything that it gets, and it's always trying to measure, do I need that information for the next page call in an updated version, or can I just reuse that? And for almost anything you get, it will not change in the matter of switching between pages. That is usually the CSS, the JavaScript, the images you just loaded from the page view before. They usually don't have to be updated. If you reload the Blitz website, there will be maybe 1 or 2 news stories that haven't been there yet. So you have to update the HTML itself, the website. and you might have to load the 1 or 2 images that are new, and everything else you can just use from your visit before. Everything else shouldn't have changed. That is where caching comes in, and that is why not having caching is such a bad thing, because that means all your page calls will be equally slow. That's really not a nice thing to do. The first page call can be a little bit slower because nothing from your website was already stored in the browser cache, but every consequent page call should be much, much faster, and on most pages it is. Here it's not, so probably someone should make a note for that to be optimized. And the second point already is optimized images. And there is 2 different things you can do that they're complaining about. No, the 3 different things they complain about really is if you're serving images that are bigger than the ones you use. So if you use a 1000 pixel image and you're only displaying it with 300 pixels width, your image is just really physically too big. Of course, digitally, but physically too big. That is one thing they complain about. Another thing that the tools complain about is if you're using a nice quality version of that image, because you want to, they're still complaining, but maybe you're not listening to that. Don't trust the numbers strictly. Always think a little. If they say the image quality is too good to be true, then maybe you just leave that. But in many, many cases, they're right, and most of those optimizations can be done without even visibly losing quality, so it's at least worth looking into that. They are mostly complaining about that the image is really not optimized enough, and you can do a lot, especially on PNG, if you optimize the image after saving with Photoshop. Because Photoshop really is bad at optimizing. Photoshop is nice at keeping the quality alive, which is exactly the opposite of optimizing it for size. So that's a real life example. I wouldn't even go much deeper than the E here. The JavaScript used on the page is not nicely minified. Minification, for anyone not knowing what it is just removing all the elements you don't need. Blank spaces, comments, everything you don't need in a JavaScript file. It's also true for CSS. Shouldn't be there when you deliver the file to the browser, because the browser doesn't care about comments or empty spaces. And that can save a lot. You see even here, Incubator Lodash could save 59 kilobytes just on that file, which is over 60%, if you're just compressing that properly. If you're minifying that as much as possible, and then probably also gzip compressing that, so you deliver the file as small as possible.
Can I just jump right in there?
Yes.
Essentially, you shouldn't load Lodash if you don't have to. So
I don't even know what Lodash is.
Oh, it's a bad use of that. So it's a whole library to handle a lot of JavaScript manipulation. So the first step is removing the unused scripts by hand and then optimizing it.
Yes.
Because 0 kilobytes is better than 50 kilobytes.
A lot better.
And 0 requests.
You see that from Incubator. I would stop here after the first 3 elements. Because you can see this is already almost 90 points a B. Those 3 are pulling down the rating. Even if someone says, spend as much time as you think is necessary to get that page faster, I would only optimize those 3. Everything else is really very tiring, detailed optimization that will not give you the same results. Optimizing those 3 will give huge results. We will see that in our client project where I did a couple of steps. Sorry, spoiler, that really didn't do anything. I just still left them in the presentation because it's really valuable part. Some optimization steps are just not giving you what you hope for. So we also loaded. I wanted to surprise you with that, because ignore that you saw the result. This page, well liked, well used, doesn't even have images, at least on the home page. It's just a long, long list of text and links and information. We just talked about it at the first part, that images are the most blocking thing, the most elements to download, the biggest data dump to download on a website, which means images are usually making your website slow. Ignore that you saw the result. How would you think the page does with page speed? Good, medium good, bad?
Good.
Thank you. It doesn't. which is kind of surprising. It's even worse, and a good deal worse, than the incubator, which has a couple of images.
You just know that we are not seeing the ads on the homepage because you have the ad blocker. That's the thing that is actually...
Yeah, you see that here with the screenshot. There is a lot of ads loaded. But still, the page itself, other than the advertising, doesn't have images. And you still see that's a really bad rating for everything. They also don't use caching, and they also don't optimize their images. It's almost the same. Oh no, they have something else. I didn't want to talk about sprites. Who knows what the sprite is? That was really well-used technology a couple of years ago. That is putting a lot of small images in one big image. And then you only have to download that one big image, and with CSS you can position that. So in your window, you always see that one icon that you need. That's done completely with background positioning. Interestingly enough, that was also done on the Game Boy. That was the technology that made animation on a computer level possible that a Game Boy has. That's where the sprite technology comes from. Yeah, so same points with a page that doesn't even have images. Really not nice. Then we talked about Polovny Automobili. Apparently from very technically savvy people.
Very bad.
Also really not nicely optimized, and usually, that's a really common thing I see, page speed optimization is treated as a complete front-end technology. The front-end team at Yahoo made the topic public interest. They wrote the first book about page speed optimization. And a lot of technically savvy people are coming from the back end or think the back end is the only thing where real programming happens, and really that's a real nice example of what happens then usually. The technology behind the page is nice, but because no one ever optimized the front end, the user experience might not be. And the first part of the user experience in this case would be it's really just a slow page, even if it looks nice. So they also have the same problem that Litz has with the redirects, no caching, too much JavaScript loading at a page load. gzip, oh, they don't have the images. Ha. They optimize their images, isn't that a nice view? So my favorite topic is done well on this page. They have a lot of other problems. So I opened, oh no, I just showed you my login area. I want to show you what the live page looks like that we talk about. That's the Dieter Schwarz Foundation, that's the owner of Lidl and Kaufland, and he's pouring a lot of money into education and universities, and the foundation, we made the foundation website. It's just promoting all the good things they're doing. Usually when you page speed optimize and when you look at a page, you should look at a couple important pages. Please don't page speed every page. The selection of the pages that are worth looking at is the first step that you need to find out. It's usually the home page because most people will see that. It's usually the main thing they are doing, which in this case here for the company is the founding they're doing. And I also opted to put in the news because we build a page with the complete news archive on one page. You don't have to load the archive, it's always there, which also means there is a lot of elements. So it's really not made for page speed optimization, it's made for nice user experience. And then I looked at a news detail page because they're writing a lot of news. They have something like, I don't know, 1 or 2 news a week. So the news detail page shouldn't be too slow. But it could be because there is in many cases a gallery in there with small preview windows and a light box to open it up. And we have related news at the bottom of the news. So this might be slow, I just wanted to include it. So looking at the page, I see for you it's a little bit small. Let's change that. So what I wanted to show you first is what we can see with Chrome, because Chrome can show you a lot. The network tab is a really interesting thing because here you cannot only reload a page and see every single element that belongs to this page being loaded, which is a lot of elements. You can also really go into detail, click that, see what's coming, see which headers are there, what the response from the server was, HTML of course for HTML page. But you can also look at this thing, which is called a waterfall, and all the tools are showing that in one way or another. And that is really what happened with the page. Oh, there was some dynamic thing happening right now. That's why waterfall is so short. And if you hover over that, they explain to you with a waterfall of just that file what happened when loading the page. I have to read it to you because you can barely read it yourself. It was waiting for 16 milliseconds on the server. Then it was waiting for 11 milliseconds for building up the connection to the server. Looking up the DNS where to get the page from took 25 milliseconds. The initial connection to the server took 87 milliseconds. Figuring out SSL took 50 milliseconds. Sending the request to the server took 0.6 milliseconds. And waiting, because that's the time to first byte. The first element we talked about, that's, wait, I have mouse. The time to first byte, here the green bar, is the first time we have a longer waiting, that's 200 milliseconds. That's the time the server took to generate the page and to send it to the browser, everything that is standing in the way there. The browser needed 20 milliseconds to get the file and unpack everything and be ready to show it. So our HTML file took something like 400 milliseconds from first click to being completely done. Sadly, website is more than just the HTML file. But you see every single element that was loaded as part of the file. That's already nice. There is also the performance tab. I showed a screenshot of that. You can start recording here, then you can reload the page. We're done. We should stop. And this is showing you what happened when loading the page. Really parsing HTML, evaluating JavaScript, compiling the script, drawing the HTML, drawing the CSS, recalculating sizes. If you want to go deep into page speed optimization, read everything you see here. I'm not joking. Because there is a lot of knowledge to be gained. And it's also a fun game to get at least one of your clients or private websites to 100%. At least once, because then you see how futile that is to do on a daily basis. It's almost impossible to get to 100%. You have to jump through hoops that are sometimes really not fun. Not at all work needs to be fun, but funny, or at least.
Could you do the same with the Blitz website?
Yeah, of course.
Right now?
Yes. I can also do that right now. So, no. Blitz.rs. So, you already see the difference? That took a while. No, I don't want you to give me something. And of course I have an ad blocker that made the experience faster. It still took a while. Performance. Start recording, reload. So I should stop here somewhere. It wasn't still finished. You saw that some of the images were coming in later. And of course, because they have a lot more elements, there is really a lot more to do. Yeah, we're not building elephants on the website. But this goes really too far deep into the rabbit hole. I just wanted to show that those tools are already included in Chrome, and they're a nice first step into page speed optimization, to look into that and see what's happening. The entry point, the best entry point really is GTmetrix. That's why I started with that and showed a lot there. So this is the live website. The copy looks a little destroyed because I removed all our image rules. So this is the original image that we uploaded to the server. And the original image, even if it's not shown in full size, is in a figure container, you see that. It's right now shown at 560 pixels, because of course we have limited space, but the original image is 1920 to 1280 pixels. And we're loading that image. It doesn't matter how big we show it, because there is no optimization right now. Which means we could probably save a couple megabytes just by removing that image, or scaling it down, of course. And I prepared a couple. I wanted to show you the other pages. wanted to show you the other pages that we're looking at first before we go deeper. So we looked at the founding portfolio. That's everything they are doing. This is all the projects they're giving money for. I think it's something like 35 projects or something like that. This is of course one of the most important pages, and it's nice because there is a lot of small images there. The news page, I didn't want to just tell you, there is 6 news, and then you can load more, which really loads the complete archive. We just have back to 2016, but it's all the news they ever had are visible in the archive. That's not a dynamic reload or anything, it's really content on the page. I wanted to make sure that that's also one of the good and bad things. You download the full page, so even if you come to an area with bad connections or something like that on a mobile, you can still use the page because you can just open the accordion and you already have all the content instead of dynamically loading it. And I am showing, I think, all the results from this page. It's one news detail page, also with a nice big image at the beginning. We have a gallery at the end. And, get me out of here. We have correlating news, which is also something like 7 or 8 other news that are with the same topic. So the page is simple but still complicated enough that things can go wrong. And I want to show you the first testing results. I prepared them all in the presentation, so we can go a little bit faster after the first couple. But I wanted to show you a live thing. So this is with no optimization. This is where the homepage lands. At 22% and an F. Also important is really looking at the download size. It's 5.8 megabytes, which if you don't have a nice fast connection, is really just taking forever, just because it's too big. Let me switch back to the presentation. So, as I said, we look at those 4 pages. Test run number 1, I can barely see that. Test run number 1. We're using the Contao CMS as always. Contao itself optimizes a couple of things already. All the CSS, all the JavaScript coming out of the system is already minified and optimized. I couldn't disable that because it's part of the system. But that's really the only optimization we did. I disabled all the caching. We're delivering the page with the old HTTP 1. I will say 2 words when we switch that. And we delivered all the images in the original size that the client gave to us, that we uploaded to the server, which in most cases is not the size we want to use them in. And there is no page speed extension or something like that in use, so it's really the raw website. I jumped a couple of pages. Okay, so this is the full result. The first is the home page, we just looked at that. The second one is the project page. The third one is always the news, and the last one is the news detail page. For all the next tests I want to show you, which really, this is bad results. Especially the project page gets 0 points. I was surprised myself. It has 8 megabytes, still doesn't load too slowly because we have nice connection, and the servers are really nice and fast. We do our hosting ourselves, so it would be stupid to slow it down there. I was surprised by the news archive because it got more points than that page with 24 megabytes of images to be downloaded. That's crazy. Of course, it's still an F, but not a 0% F. And the news detail page is a 60% F, also 4.5 megabytes to download. It's way too big. The next thing we changed is really just limiting the maximum size of images to 1280 pixels. The website is never using bigger images than that anyway. But usually clients don't upload it in that size, and we also don't upload it in that size, because in the future we might want to use a bigger version of that image, and then you always have to go back, search for the original. So we upload images in a too big version just to have the possibility to use it later. And because Contao gives us resizing, so we use that. just limiting that doesn't really help us that much. This is, on the left side you see still from the first run, on the right side you see for comparison. The homepage didn't profit that much because there is only one big image on it. The project page has all those projects, the 35, so the size goes down a good deal. For the news page also, it's mostly the size going down. We get barely more points because really the images still are in the completely wrong sizing. And the news detail page is almost half the size. It was really nice here. I can also tell you why. Those gallery images I showed quickly are in full HD mode, and we show them in, I don't know, 400 pixels, so this really compresses nicely. Test run free, and I can show you this in Contao also. Contao has a really nice image rule set where you can say, for this responsive version I want this size, for this responsive version I want that size. And you can really make media queries combined with image sizes. And we have something like 7 different rules for header images, for images used as a preview image, for the news preview, for the gallery images. And if you put in, I would say, that little effort that is needed, it's just clicking a couple of options. It's also available as, there's other plugins for WordPress that can do the same thing. There is also plugins that do that automatically. You will see why I'm promoting that so much. Because this is the first big step in optimization we can do. We go down in size from the first comparison here, more than half for the first page. We go down from 8 megabytes to 800 kilobytes for the projects, from 24 megabytes to 1.7 megabytes for the news detail page, news overview, and from 4.5 to 700 kilobytes. So you see immediately, the slower the internet connection in that case is, the more you can benefit from the image optimization, especially on a mobile, especially if you have a bad connection. If you live in a smaller city or just on the outskirts of a big city, you don't have that nice of connection. People there will be really happy about that. Just having to download less.
Sorry.
Yes.
This is only with a ruling, changing the rule, setting up the rules, or with a test run 2 plus.
Yes, it's always the next optimization level on top of the first one.
Okay.
Okay. Test run 4. How many of you know the difference between HTTP 1 and 2? All hands go up. The first row goes up. Nice. Okay. HTTP is, of course, the protocol that websites are delivered over. That's how the server talks with the browser and how they exchange information. And we've been using HTTP 1 since the internet was invented. And everything that happens when they two talk with each other, so please give me this file, yes, of course, here is the file, it's that big, and you can expect that to come. All of that communication is in the protocol. And HTTP 1 could always only give you one file per request, which means for every request you wanted to make to the server, you needed to ask the browser at the server again. So please give me this file. Okay, here's this file. Then give me the next file, and give me the next file. So they needed to invent a new technology, still HTTP 1, to at least ask for multiple files in parallel. But that stops being profitable at something between 5 and 10 files at the same time. So you can never download more than 5 to 10 files at the same time with HTTP 1. And if you go back, just you see, it's 50 and 64 and 100. It's here 50, 64, 100 and 49 requests, elements that the server has to provide to you. And HTTP 2 is just removing one block. You only need one connection from server to browser. And in that one connection, the browser can ask for multiple files at the same time, and the server just gives them as soon as he's ready. There is no block anymore. You can ask for 100 files, and the server is just giving them to you without asking for information or anything like that. That really, really speeds up, especially if you have a lot of small files. With the appearance of HTTP 2, you can now, with good conscience, stop combining your CSS and JavaScript into one file, which is bad for overview and for maintenance. It nicely optimized it as long as asking for files was such a hassle. But with HTTP 2, it really is very, very quick in giving you a lot of small files. So that should have boosted our website nicely again. Maybe it does with another testing tool. I'm not showing you the results, they look the same. As I said, all testing tools have a little bit different focuses. They measure a couple of different metrics. They weight them differently. Maybe another tool would have given me a nice boost for using a different technology. GTmetrix didn't care. Maybe the website was already fast enough so it didn't make a difference. Or maybe I was looking too soon in the process. Maybe HTTP2 gives me a little nice boost at the end if every one of the important tasks is already done. That really is something you have to figure out on your own. You have to test it and try different ways. And it's never a bad idea to use a technology that is better at serving websites, even if the tool doesn't immediately show that. Back to don't only trust the numbers, also trust a little bit your brain. It's, usually what you get paid for. So, test run 4, no result. Test run 5, I enabled caching. There's 3 things of caching we can enable in Contao and also in WordPress. I think you have a setting for caching on the server. So you're making static copies of all the files that get auto-generated on the server side. For example, also all those reduced images and everything that the server was creating live gets stored somewhere so the next request is faster. I also enabled caching on the server side and for the browser, which means every file we send to the browser knows, oh, I can keep this for, and you can yourself set a time limit. For example, a month or a year. And we developed a small page-speed extension that does less than it sounds. It just makes sure we can give really big caching numbers. For example, we cache usually the CSS for a year. And we add a little bit of string magic, just query strings, to make sure that when we change the CSS file, it still gets loaded, because with the query string, it really is recognizable as a new file. But it's really everything that does is giving us better feedback on updating a CSS file. So I compared that with the last version, not with the first one. It would have been a little bit unfair. You see that with the page sizes, nothing changed that much, but you also see that is the second big step in optimizing. You also saw that when we looked at GTmetrix Live, it was either images or caching that was the big first element. And with caching, that's the last big optimization we need. We usually say we stop at 90%. So this would be good enough for almost all our clients. You also don't see any changes in the last column here, because it's still the same amount of files, and it's still the sizes didn't change other than very small fluctuations. But I can show you, and for that, web page speed test is the best tool, not my beloved GTmetrix. No, I want to use the news page. There. So when you use web page speed test for the very first time, there is an important setting. You should go to the advanced settings and say first view and repeat view, because other than that you don't see the caching. And then we enter and we start the test. We're starting the test. Oops. Yes. That might take a while because web page speed test is a free tool like almost all the others. I'm waiting at the front of the queue. That doesn't happen that often. Very often you land at place 10 or 15 in the queue, you just have to wait. Front of the queue is really a quick one. It's always doing free runs of the website to eliminate fluctuations in the connection speed or something like that. It's really a nice tool on a technical level. Jake Archibald, I talked about him with the Formula 1 testing. He also used web page test because it gives the cleanest number. It does the less interpretation on that. It gives you just the waterfall. You see that again, that we saw on the network tab. It also shows you the screenshots of the page. Almost all the tools are doing that. And now it's done. Please ignore the AAA rating, because you saw with Blitz, it's not worth that much. Almost every website today gets AAA or AAB ratings because they don't expect too much optimization from you. But the really interesting thing with web page test is the first run, and it says the run 2 is the one with the most valuable data. Still can't barely see the numbers. Better. The page to be fully loaded, document complete. Oh yeah, they separate document complete and fully loaded. but they're not that far apart. Took something between 4.3 and 4.8 seconds. Too long, but not by much, better than average. But our second view, the repeat call on the page, wasn't 104 requests, it was 2. It only asked for the HTML, and I have no idea what else. But you instantly see the second request was 1.8 seconds. Only 22 kilobytes to download. And every new page request will be the fast one, not the slow one first. That is the difference that caching makes. You only have to download the elements that are really new and not everything again. For Blitz, you have to download all the 460 elements with every time you call the page. That makes for an ongoing terrible experience, not just for the first time. So caching really is important, and you can see that nicely in Chrome again. Let me go to the network tab. So I'm reloading. No, I didn't want to sort. No. Okay. There is a column for the size of the element it's showing you. And it says, you see that almost all the elements, there is our second element. So one element is the HTML that was downloaded fresh. Can you see that? And all this says disk cache. File came from the disk cache, that's the browser cache. There is the second file it had to download.
That's 1.css, was that?
I have no idea. Oh, that's from the font. That's from our font provider, the counting pixel. And that's the drawback we just have to make. The client wanted to use that font. I think it's fonts.com or fonts.net. And we pay for the font license, so they want to count how often we use it. Those are the only 2 elements that could not be cached. Everything else is coming nicely from the cache. There is another one. The fav icon. Why couldn't you cache the fav icon? Okay. For a later point. For a non-cached page, you would see all the different sizes, and I don't have to explain that to you. We have the completely unoptimized page. Oh, and we can maybe see something really interesting, because Chrome doesn't care. Yeah, Chrome doesn't care. Websites like Blitz that didn't properly do the caching, they got a huge break when Chrome decided there is so many bad websites out there that give us no caching information at all. We will just guess at the best caching option. So if they download an image or download any element, Google Chrome is guessing if we can cache it or not. And you see here, they cached it from memory, almost the full page. None of this should be cached. If we look at an image, the header doesn't give you any caching information. I need to go back to the nicely optimized page where there's an image. And here we say, this image expires Saturday, July 6th at the same time. Oh yes, because it was generated on April 2nd. Why doesn't this cache? Oh, and here it says, for cache control, the maximum age is, I would guess this is 30 days. Usually we set our caching to 30 days. So this is all caching information that you do not see on the not optimized element. So we cannot show all of the practical things, because the first idea was to do a 4-hour workshop. Everyone told us no one wants to listen to that for 4 hours. So we slimmed it down a little. We could look at how to do the page sizes, the image sizes in Contao. We could look at the cache settings that you will also find in a lot of software. Who's most interested in what? Caching, images, caching first, show of hands. Okay, images, don't really care. I want to see hands. Okay, that was a draw more or less. I try to do both. Okay, I hope every one of you has had contact with an htaccess file, because that's usually where a little bit of the magic is happening. And this is really the server with the live view for the website, htaccess. With htaccess, you can tell Apache a couple of things he should do. Something like model redirect is usually there for nicely readable aliases and stuff like that. And you can also really, no matter what the website is, bigger.
Okay.
Control plus? No. Shift plus? No. Alt plus. Touchscreen? Touchscreen. Okay. Big enough? Yes.
Yeah.
Ah. So, no matter what technology your website is based on, the following blocks you can always do. E-tag is a technology that was used for caching a long while ago. Something like 10 years ago, the Yahoo team said, stop using e-tag. It still exists, you should always disable that. It's really confusing for most elements along the way. Most browsers and most servers don't like it anymore. It's just a typical tip. Ah yeah, it comes from developer.yahoo. We even left a comment in here. But all the rest is really just standard rules for caching that you can do no matter what the technology is based on. So we really don't want to cache HTML. Wait, ignore that. We don't want to cache HTML. So that's access plus 0 seconds, which means please always get a fresh version of this file. It's the same thing for XML, for JSON files. They're usually too dynamic to be cached. But if you get any kind of image, JPEG, PNG, we don't care, video file or anything like that, it's access plus 1 month. So the last time it was accessed plus 1 month, the browser is allowed to store that. And that is the time you just saw in the browser, that's the expiry date. Forgot the word for word name.
Just expires.
Expires, yes. It's set here all for 1 month, because 1 month was always the limit to acknowledge that as being cached. You saw Google is caching some things for 15 minutes, that's really not caching. And you can comfortably set that to longer times if your backend is doing tricks to fix it again. But we've cached everything for a month, which is already really nice, and you saw the big gap, the big step up in the rating for the page speed analysis. So this is from the server settings. I will also show you what it looks like in our favorite Contao, but in the live version. So get this away. So me logging in. So, oh, German, very nice. Let me switch that so you can follow more easily. So, English, much better. No, don't save that. Where did I want to go? Cache settings. This is basic settings. Oh, they're not in settings anymore. They're now part of site structure. I sometimes get confused. There was a version change. So, at the root page in Contao, we can say, please cache the content. And there's both settings that I talked about. You can say, save whatever you generated on the server for at least 60 seconds. Because that's, for example, if a bot attack comes or a DDoS attack or something like that, if thousands of requests are coming in at the same time, they just get cache results, even for just a minute. That's already removing a lot of stress on the website. So you should almost never go without caching, even if it's just 60 seconds. And we say the client should keep everything we're doing for 12 hours. Because there is usually no new news in 12 hours, and if there is, you don't miss it. There really is that, again, that, you know, using your brain to see how updated does it need to be. We can comfortably say with this page, if you get a new version every 12 hours, you will not miss a lot. For Blitz, for example, writing a news article every 5 minutes, that would be a terrible setting. They shouldn't have more than 5 minutes here. They have 0, so 5 minutes would be a much better setting for them. And that's it. I don't want to destroy the tension, but that's all the settings you need to do for having properly cached pages. You need to set it up in the CMS, you need to set it up on the server side. Usually there is really generators for that HTXS stuff, you don't even need that, or ready-made blocks and block entries, just copy it to a HTXS file. You're already going from a C or D to A or B territory for most of the testing. When you're at that level, you can start using different tools. For example, PageSpeed Insights, which is really cruel to your results. You saw that we have 95% now for the page. The nicely optimized live website. PageSpeed Insights. There it is. I didn't do that before. This will be a surprise. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Mobile, we didn't see mobile results. Desktop will be much better, if no idea. 88. Okay, 88 is nice. I was dreading something more worse. But you also see our page is much better optimized for desktop than for mobile. And that is with getting 95% on GTmetrix. So this is really a very nice and the best entry point you can have for getting into PageSpeed optimization. As soon as you think you're done, go to PageSpeed Insights. They will give you more work to do. And I think sometimes they are too harsh. But especially for mobile, there is no better tool right now because they're really going deep. And they're proposing a lot of technologies that are upcoming, or I would say coming in the last 3 years. For example, they want you to use the local storage with JavaScript instead of cookies, and making sure you use all the technology available from the browser side, so actively storing things in the browser cache, in the browser history and all of that. Speeds up the page views, but of course that's really very active work to make sure the page is optimized. For most websites, they are not nearly on a level that makes sense. Most websites are like Blitz on a F level on the rating and need to get the basics first. Marco.
What do you think about making the page available offline, for example, like something like PVA? So what do you think, what could be the impact on the page scores if we would have that?
Google likes that a lot.
That's why I'm asking. Yeah.
Yes. Google likes it a lot if your website is completely independent, could even run offline, and you can do that with the service workers. That's the thing that can help you. You can also implement a JavaScript-based caching system in your browser via service workers. They like technologies like that a lot. No other tool can even look at that and measure that properly. And because there is now Lighthouse included, you see that here, the speed score is coming from Lighthouse, they included that in the page speed. That's, I think it changed, they did it in July 18, so a year ago. And since then, the measurements have become a lot more detailed and much harder to get a good rate. Even our website that had websites that had something like 90, or even our own website had 98 points in PageSpeed Insights. So with the harsh tool, we are now at 60 or 65 something, just because they switched how they measure things. There's always work to be done, isn't that nice? More questions. Are you interested in something specific we didn't go into because I had to cut out a couple of elements? Tell me. Questions? Wishes? 3 is the limit, just to remind you. We could count Marco as 1. 2 more. I have time. Come on, I saw interested faces. Ask the question that's lingering in your mind. Really not. I think too many cookies is the breakdown. Okay. Less cookies next time.
Okay, can you show us what's really bad in this analyzer? For example, right now, what you have there as a report.
Could you please switch to English?
Oh, no, because I don't know how.
Yeah, you can just right-click translate English.
No, I cannot.
Translate it now.
because it says translate to German, which doesn't work. I don't know how to translate it. Okay.
I have a question, sorry.
Yes.
You said about page loading that you had that images and you loaded first, and you said that that's better option than dynamically getting all images that are hidden in space.
Yes.
You had a gallery and something.
Yes.
So why is that?
There is a couple different schools that you have to think and compare with. Are you optimizing for user experience, or are you optimizing for speed and more for the search engines than for the users? And I'm always opting for the user, because I think even if the search engines are rating something differently right now, the main goal, the end result, will be that search engines will rate user experience over everything else, because that's what they deliver as an added value to the users. So I'm always opting for user experience first, and we download the full news archive when you open the page. So you can really look at that news archive and never get bogged down. You can switch between years and everything, and you always have the content instantly, which will always be faster than if you have to dynamically load it down. And our page, that's the nice side benefit of the page speed optimization. Downloading the full archive only takes 2 seconds, and it's only 1.5 megabytes, something like that. So because we optimize the page nicely, we can have the luxury of just downloading all the news. And that's the benefit then for the user experience. You never have to dynamically load anything or trick the system to be even faster. It's already fast enough, so we can have some leeway.
So what about business applications, for usage inside the company, not out the world?
Yeah, you shouldn't really page speed optimize that, because it's usually coming from a local server, and in many cases it's not even available for outside tools to be measured. Or you remove everything that's interesting with routing and the file going through the whole world. With a local service, you don't have most of the problems. Okay, I want to answer Marco's question, and then our limit of free things is finished. Google says I have to live translate. Non-visible images should be deferred, should be loaded later. That's the thing I talked about with the above the fold optimization. So you should only load the part of the website that you can immediately see, and everything below that should be loaded later. And really, Google says it's not an an optional step. We want that to happen. For us, that's priority number 1. With that page on a mobile, because you also see that's mobile screenshots, you could save almost 7 seconds. And 7 seconds is a lot. I don't even see the overall time here. 10.1 seconds until the page becomes interactive, and we could save almost 7 seconds with loading the images later. That's the difference between lightning fast and having to wait. So that would be something they like. And they also say, please give your images to us in more modern formats, which could be WebP. Because WebP, without loss of quality, gives you a better experience. And it also says we should remove a couple of the resources. That's your JavaScript question from earlier. We should remove a couple of the resources that block rendering the page. We should load JavaScript that we don't need right now somewhere later, or not at all. There's also a comment. And that's the red entries. That's the ones we should fix here, which is already really advanced stuff in page speed optimization.
Just 1 second. Can you tell us about the above the fold? Is it something that's done manually, or you do it somehow automatically? How do you implement it?
You can do both. There is actually 3 ways. There is plugins you can have that know your application. That's the easiest ones, but usually you have to...
you kind of teach it?
Yeah, you have to train that plugin what your application has. There is that server extension that Google is providing that just does it completely automatically. Okay. There is building tools, for example, for something like, I don't know, the Power Stack or something like that. Node.js does that a lot. They have a building stack, and they can just include one step that's separating the above the fold things from the not above the fold things. Or manually, you can just always organize all your CSS and JavaScript into a needs to be loaded instantly, can be loaded later version, and you just load it that way. Some things need to be now, some things can be loaded later.
Thank you.
I wanted to show you one more thing and it would be done, because I prepared it so nicely and I know that the time is already over. Squoosh, the name is too nice. That's one of the newer optimization tools on the web. It's for free. It was developed by the Chrome team. And it's an online image optimizer. You can upload whatever image you want, and you can try around with all the image optimization settings, and then you can always compare original with optimized image. They can give you JPEG, PNG, WebP, whatever you want as a result. I just wanted to show you that there is a couple of optimization steps that Google would take that are not really nice. You see with this image, it's one of the test images they provide, the red, white, or brown, white, and green are dominating. So we could reduce the color palette to something like 256 colors. That doesn't sound like too bad an idea. If you look at the image, there's almost no difference visible. If you look more closely, and I can, well, maybe you can see that. Wait, now let me reduce the palette. We could even reduce a couple more colors. Let's see what happens. Nothing. Very nice. As soon as you go too deep, because the logic is looking for colors that are often used. As soon as you go too deep, the tone becomes gray. Because there is only very little red used in the tone and nowhere else in the picture, so the Google algorithm goes over that and says, oh, we don't need that much red. Oh, there it is. I stepped over the line, and it just needed a little while to transport that information. You see, nothing of the rest of the image has been changed. But a gray tone looks really unhealthy. That's really that poor, what is it, Dachshund, Badger, I don't know. Could also be a Firefox. Oh yeah, it's a panda, it's a Firefox.
It's a red panda.
It's a what?
Red panda.
Yeah, red panda, yes, of course, that's the icon from the Firefox that's usually misused. Yes, it's a really harsh element to take away his red tone. And that's also, don't trust the numbers. Google says that's a nice optimization because the file has been reduced by 66%. On the other hand, you don't see any quality drawback on the rest of the image, but really a great tone. I will leave you with that image. Thanks for coming.
Silence.
No, because you sounded surprised, which means you have it. Nice.